Welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben. Today we're taking a look at Super Blood Harvest. So this is a collection of 3 different zines, essentially, created by Dirk, the illustrator from Silent Titans, and it's been combined into this very deluxe hardback book by the people at Hot Springs Island. It's a series of adventures for the most part, based around the Into the Odd system. Here's the back of our book. I love the form factor of this. It's done on this sparkly cloth material, so it looks like this very dense star field. It's a very fancy and unusual look. The little sparkles are a combination of like silver and dark blue. It's a really great look. The whole book was created by the author, Dirk. He just goes by Dirk with a Vengeance in this book. So that means that all the illustration, all of the writing, all the layout, everything done by one person, which means that it ends up having this very cohesive feel and this kind of unified aesthetic throughout the whole book that's relatively unusual in role-playing games. Before we dig into this book, though, a quick shout out to some of my new and upgraded patrons over on Patreon, including Anel Juarez, Gianfranco Bux, Alex Harker, Mike Musterick, Wes Baker, Kemper Straley, and Julio Ribeiro. Thank you so much for supporting on Patreon. Supporters at the $5 or $10 level get to see these videos early, as well as help me vote on new books to review. Before we dig into it here, we're going to actually start near the back of the book, because that's where the rule system is. So it's a very abbreviated Into the Odd-like system. If you played Into the Odd, not a lot of changes here, but there are some tweaks. And the first thing to point out is that I love the layout and the design of this book. It's absolutely fantastic, especially this section for the rules. We have a brief rundown of how to play, what a referee is, what you're going to be doing, in a very concise way that's easy to understand. I love the use of this kind of pixelated all caps font. It brings to mind old-fashioned video games, which is a theme that is going to be throughout this whole book. I love the use of different colors and bolding for different concepts. It makes everything pop. And it's very easy to process and digest while you're reading it. It uses strength, dexterity, and will. It's a roll-under system, like all Into the Odd stuff. It has rules for how to do battle, so it's all direct damage, so there's no rolling to hit. But there are some advanced actions, which I don't believe you normally see in Into the Odd. Stuff like fainting, grappling, taunting, trying to rout enemies. That's a cool little bonus action that you can do there, where if an enemy's injured, you don't necessarily make a morale check for them, but you can kind of force a morale check by trying to terrify them into fleeing. In between actions, you can take one reaction. So there's a lot of dynamism in how fights go. Here's some extra rules for speed, deprivation, making quick characters. Some rules on equipment. So the standard money item is gems. Again, it feels very video gamey. And character improvement is done by collecting items from monsters. So really there is a strong combat focus here, which is a little unusual given the Into the Odd system. So basically, you're looking for these might ups, speed ups, or magic ups, which can increase your 3 main characteristics, or chocolates, which give you +5 max hit points. So you're going to need to be fighting monsters, preferably big, dangerous ones, if you want them to drop all of that stuff. All right, let's get into the actual adventures here. So it's basically 3 adventures, and each of them is increasingly more dangerous and more expansive than the one before it. So, escape the blood ship, crashed on the moon, and Killbot Guardian Gods. Even the name Super Blood Harvest evokes old video games, especially platformers and things like that. The blood ship comes once per generation to swell its guts on our vitae. You've been abducted by a vampire space fortress. You wake in a shallow sea of blood, a fuel reservoir for your immortal captors. So that's a great way of starting in media res. We have a lot of the very surreal, slightly Escher-esque artwork that we've seen from Silent Titans. And I love how this starts. Select your player. There's 6 different basic character types you can choose from. And in each of these subsequent zines, 6 more character types are introduced. They're all very short. They're all very punchy. They get some sort of special thing. This guy has pressure points. He can do D8 dexterity damage. Fits through tight spaces. This guy can sucker punch things. He can use alien devices, and so on. And here's our first map of inside the vampire spaceship in which you awake. You awake over in number 1, and then you can explore from there. I love the large maps and the wide use of space here. I do wish there was a lot more information on here. And this is going to be a theme that comes up throughout this book, where, especially with the maps, and this is a similar complaint that I had to Silent Titans, they're often very beautiful and stimulating to look at, but they're not always the easiest to use. Although this is better than Silent Titans, right? It's just a checkerboard. You can see how people would move around. But more information could be put on here to make it easier to use. There's plenty of space to do it. We have the blood chip here, and basic rules for getting around. Each square represents 10 feet, and then the different zones are labeled here. So that does mean there's some flipping back and forth, figuring out where you are. And just like a general complaint is that, yeah, not only should there be more descriptions, I think, in here, or at least room names, but more detail put into what's going on in these rooms. Just from looking at the map, things come across as very flat. It's hard to picture what's going on in this place because there's a lot of abstraction going on. That being said, there's a lot of variety in the different rooms that you can discover. Although my general impression is that there is a lot of focus on combat. This is especially true in some of the later adventures. Now, one confusing thing was that when I was reading this originally, I found this section. I was reading about the blood chip, and for some reason I thought that this corresponded to the description of the blood chip, which confused me a lot for quite a while. Because this is actually a bestiary. It's what all of the monsters look like, but it's drawn as if it's another map, which is frankly a little bit confusing, or it was for me anyway. Because you have the different encounters that you can run into here, and then you can kind of look back here to see what they might look like. Most of them have different types of attacks. There's some vampire stuff that can drain your blood. And then we have a picture of lots of different items you can get here, especially treasure. So unlike games like Electric Bastion Land, where the focus is to get as much money as possible and pay off these debts, I would assume the focus of this game is to find large monsters and kill them, and thus get level ups. But there is some treasure that can do other stuff. Quite a lot of them involve doing different types of damage, but some of them give you like space outfits, which is important because there's a lot of areas of these maps that are just void. You can get specialized swords, red putty, which tries to crawl down your throat. Infection, each week increase your strength and food consumption by 1. So good and bad mixes, that's nice. A butterfly pin lets you talk to bugs and bug-like things. And that's the first zine, which is quite a short one. Second one is Super Blood Harvest 2, Crashed on the Moon. The Bloodlords built a temple for the thing they found below, but the god of the moon despised their worship and cast Vlad's children into darker space, deeper banishment. You wake on the steps of an abandoned lunar temple, surrounded by void and wreckage and no way home. So I think the presumption here is that if you play through the first zine, then you can seize control of the vampire ship and crash it into the moon and then pick up from there. Although I think a lot of these are really intended to be more like one-shots or to be self-contained adventures. There is a way to kind of string them together. Again, we get this fantastic layout. Select your player. So some of your options here are sentient power armor, an ectosphere, a Dompier, a Venusian exile, a space pirate, or a psychic test subject. So it reminds me a little bit of what we saw in Electric Bastion Land, in that you have very distinct archetypes that give you flavor and special abilities for you to latch onto right from the beginning. A map of the crashed blood ship. No, I think this is actually a temple. Yeah, this is the temple that you can explore after your ship crashes. So again, we have the similar situation with the maps. It's very hard to tell to what extent things are abstracted and to what extent they are literal. That's, I think, my main complaint. Does the temple actually look exactly like this, where it's just a bunch of blocks stacked together, kind of like a Minecraft situation? Or is it supposed to be sort of abstracted and you're supposed to fill things in with more details? There's just a lot of open space with a lot of just squares on it. And it's hard to picture what you would be doing as you just kind of move around these areas. Moon Temple, Temple Step. So all of these main areas here, T1, T2, T6, all of these are labeled here and then put on here. Now, one concern in general is that a lot of these places are just really dangerous. That's another common theme. Most of the rooms you run into, and later on, the regions that you can explore, are extremely dangerous, packed with all sorts of horrifying things, and it begins to be a little bit questionable as to why the players would go there, if everything is just trying to murder them right away. Now, I suppose, since the goal is to kill things and get the power-ups that way, that could be one motivation. But Into the Odd in general is not a very combat-focused game. Characters are relatively fragile and can die very quickly. And so my concern would be is that your characters are going to start running from room to room, and all sorts of horrible things will start chopping them to pieces really quickly. A cloister that you can explore beneath the temple. We have Underkirk, which is sort of an underground labyrinth. There's things that look cool as a kind of decorative device, like the way that this arrow, I think, is describing how this elevator works. But there's enough abstraction where it's hard to picture exactly how everything works. Like, does this thing connect to this door here or just to this one? Are there walls around each of these, or are they floating in space like it is on the spaceship? It's hard to know. So a lot of DM just judgment is going to have to go into that. We have a crashed spaceship here that you can explore. Again, we have things like this ladder going up to this platform over here. Does the spaceship actually have a platform that's kind of floating off of the main deck? Or is this an abstraction that is taking us to another floor? I find that just a little bit confusing. Here we have a bunch of new monsters that you can encounter in these regions. And some new treasure, including a spell system for Venusian spell tomes and rules for casting spells. The titles of everything are great. Everything is extremely evocative. I especially love the character names, but also stuff like spell tomes called the Beam Bible or the Hover Tome, the Omniflame Heresies. It's great. It's fun to say. It's fun to think about. There's a lot of adventure fuel there. Certainly a lot of stuff that you could steal. And then we come on to our third zine. Super Blood Harvest 3, Killbot Guardian Gods. Again, the layout continues to be absolutely stellar. I love the cream-colored paper, the bright primary colored lettering here done in this black letter. Feels like a medieval text mashed together with like Super Mario Brothers, which is just a fun combination. All of Dirk's art, as usual, is stunning to look at. A general overview here. You live in the Habsphere Anarchies, free human colonies hidden in the last Martian jungles. So this is an actual, well, not a hex crawl, but I guess you would call it a square crawl across the surface of Mars that's taken over by these Killbot Guardian Gods, these robotic menaces that roam the landscape and have enslaved humans in one form or another. Vampires, of course, also feature. So here's the Habsphere Anarchies, where I presume you start. We have things like the Dragon Mountain, or the Mountain Dragon. We have the Sea Dragon, the House of Luddites over there. And then we have the Ark of the Imperium, the Otto Tower Confederacy, the Sleeping Gate, the Self-Replicating Spires, etc. Each of these has a quite large and fleshed out series of pages detailing what's there. Exploration. Each tile on the overland map is 100 miles. So each of these is 100 miles long, and the presumption is that you can travel one of these hexes or one of these squares per day. which is obviously a lot, but it is Mars. I suppose you could say that because Mars has much lower gravity, it's easier to travel much faster. You could sort of explain it that way. But again, we have the conflict between a literal mapping and symbolic mapping. For example, is the Otto Tower Confederacy actually this big? Is it a city that is, 700 miles long and like 1,200 or 1,500 miles tall? It's not clear what's the case there. Is this sleeping gate actually this size? The scale is unclear. So even if you are tracking, moving around square by square, how do you know when you reach something? Does this mountain literally just go up on these very sharp jumps in height? Some rules for exploration. General structure of play. So we have events that you can roll up, including threats, which you would roll over here, encounters, discoveries. There's lots of discoveries further back in the book, weather, encounters, and so on. Select your player. So your options for this zine are Sword Princess, Automind Replicant, Dragon Mage, who works on elemental essences, fire, water, and slime. And there's a bunch of formula over here that you can use. We have a Bot Priest, an Escaped Clone, and a Feather Blight Exile. So overall, there's 18 new Into the Odd archetypes, I suppose, that you can use here. So the first section is the Habsphere Anarchies, which is the relatively peaceful human colonies in the last breathable part of Mars. Most of this is auxiliary systems that could be mounted to these. They can make each of the Habsphere Anarchies unique. We have the Mountain Dragon, which is like a mobile city that you can walk through and explore. The Sea Dragon, including lots of different soldiers that might be in there. Red shirts, green shirts, white shirts, and black shirts. Black shirts, for example, no jujitsu, and you have to save or be pinned on approach. Arc of the Imperium, a massive sort of mega structure, an arcology you can invade and explore. Self-replicating spires. The Otto Tower Confederacy. So as you explore the towers, you have lots of different tower rooms that can be connected together in lots of different ways to create a lot of variety. They all have like an indoor and an outdoor that you can just connect together. Sleeping Gate, some random discoveries, not all of which are dangerous. Things like the Sealed Vault, a Haunted Mansion, a Roadhouse, Blood Springs, etc. So as you discover these on the main map, it says to just mark it on the map. Although I would really feel bad writing in this book. I suppose you could print it out and write on that. But there is a pattern here of giving you information, but probably not giving you enough to really run it, and requiring you to flesh things out on your own. For example, you could come across a haunted house, and the description here is basically one sentence. So what's in this haunted house? What is the layout? What treasures are there? What sort of beings are there? Why would you want to go in? All of that stuff is going to be left up to you, which I would find a little frustrating. I would want more stuff given to the DM. We have a section on the creatures of Mars, which with a lot of variety that you can give to them, including what their goal is, what they're doing, what their position is, and so on. That adds a lot of variety, and it makes things a little bit less, attacky all the time, especially if you're just wandering around on the surface of Mars. A great list of cool mutations that you can hand out to your players. And Queen Starling is a sort of mega boss type character with 100 hit points and a lot of high level powers. Some citizens of Mars that you can play around with and put into the different areas. So the Mountain Dragon gets certain types of citizens, Sea Dragon gets certain soldiers, and so on. And we have a variety of vampire types here. So here's where the treasure comes in. So paraphernalia. So this is the treasure roll. A lot of the system I feel like is kind of encoded in here in the sense that this is the real goal of the game, getting these power-ups. But the way that this system is set up, you're only going to be able to get these power-ups if you're rolling for a rare character. It doesn't say what monsters count as rare, though I suppose you could just eyeball that. But that's the only time that you're really going to get these ways to increase your strength, dexterity, and will. Although given the amount of villains in these adventures and the power level of a lot of those villains, I'll have a hard time seeing that your character would last very long most of the time to get that powerful. Although there are plenty of powerful weapons and upgrades that both PCs and NPCs could acquire. So in theory, you could go around collecting a lot of the really astonishing cyber weapons that litter all of these adventures and become much more powerful than a lot of the villains. There's opportunities to take control of spaceships and things like that. So you really could turn a lot of the setting on its head if you were clever. Bunch of different vehicles and some vehicle systems that you can acquire. And that is the end. So that's Super Blood Harvest. It's really a singular work in that it has this, like I said, a unified aesthetic. One guy is doing all of the art, all of the design, all of the writing, and so it feels like a work that came out of one person's brain and really has their vision of what the game should look like. So it's pretty uncompromising in that sense. I'll put links down in the description below for where you can check this out for yourself. Last I checked, the hardback is still in print at the Hot Springs Island store. And of course, there's PDFs available too. All right, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.